Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Let's jump right in. Today, we're going to decode the incredibly complex and honestly fascinating biology of blood sugar. We're looking at how it impacts literally every system in your body, and what happens when that delicate metabolic balance goes off track. We'll be focusing heavily on diabetes, which is a condition that fundamentally alters how we process carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. It's something that impacts the daily lives of a huge segment of our population.
Okay, let's look at this number for a second. 26 million. Just to wrap our heads around the sheer scale of the diabetes epidemic, we really have to start here. That's the number of people in the United States alone who are currently dealing with diabetes. It's a massive, systemic issue. It impacts families, healthcare networks, everyday livelihoods, and the tough part is, that number is just continuing to climb year after year.
But when we talk about diabetes, it's really not just one uniform disease. As you can see, the vast majority of these cases, a staggering 90 to 95% of them, are type 2 diabetes. Type 1 and other variations make up that remaining 5 to 10% slice. And while both types mess with how the body handles its fuel, how they start and how they actually work inside you are entirely different. We're going to break that distinction down completely.
So here is our roadmap. First, the blood sugar balancing act. Then, what happens when the system breaks? Third, the toll on the body. Fourth, the mouth-body connection. And finally, taking back control.
All right, part one, the blood sugar balancing act.
So everything begins with your body's central command center, tucked right behind the stomach and near the liver, the pancreas. This is the crucial organ where your major blood sugar hormones are made. I kind of think of it as the body's ultimate energy thermostat. It's just sitting there, constantly monitoring and managing how you process energy from every single meal you eat.
Now, if we zoom way in on the pancreas tissue, you'll find these incredible little cellular clusters called the islets of Langerhans. And inside these microscopic clusters are highly specialized cells, specifically alpha cells and beta cells. They're basically these tireless little factories, continuously manufacturing the hormones that keep you fueled up and perfectly balanced day in and day out.
Those beta cells we just mentioned, they produce something you've definitely heard of, insulin. And I really want you to think of insulin as a literal key. See, when you eat, your food turns into glucose, and that glucose enters your bloodstream to travel around the body. But the glucose can't actually get inside your muscle or fat cells to be used for energy on its own. It needs help. Insulin is the key that unlocks the cell doors, so the glucose can finally get in and do its job.
It's amazing because your body is constantly running this beautiful negative feedback loop to keep things in perfect harmony. While insulin from the beta cells is the key that lowers blood sugar by locking excess glucose away, the alpha cells produce a hormone called glucagon. Glucagon does the exact opposite. When your blood sugar drops too low, glucagon raises it by telling the body to break those stored sugars back down and release them into the blood. It's a biological seesaw.
So what happens if your blood sugar drops simply because, say, you were crazy busy and totally forgot to eat lunch? Well, that is where this incredible emergency survival mechanism kicks in, gluconeogenesis. Glucagon literally tells your liver and muscle cells to manufacture brand new glucose by converting stored glycogen and even breaking down protein and other internal building blocks. It's your body's built-in guarantee that your cells won't starve, even if you miss a meal. Pretty brilliant, right?
Moving on to part two, when the system breaks. This is where we need to draw a biological line between the two main types of diabetes. With type 1, which usually hits early in life, the body suffers an autoimmune attack. The immune system mistakenly and completely destroys those beta cell factories. So the body simply has no keys. Type 2, on the other hand, usually develops later, often over age 40, and it's totally different. The body is still making the keys, but the locks on the cell doors, the insulin receptors, they become defective or highly resistant. In both scenarios, the sugar gets trapped in the bloodstream, but for completely different mechanical reasons. Because that sugar is trapped out in the blood, the cells are effectively starving for energy while swimming in a sea of plenty. Because of that, a patient will usually show up with three classic clinical symptoms. In medical jargon, they all start with poly, which just means many. Polyuria means many trips to pee. Polyphagia means many urges to eat, because your brain is getting these desperate signals that your cells are hungry. And polydipsia means many urges to drink, as the body frantically tries to flush out all that excess sugar by constantly hydrating.
Which brings us to part 3, the toll on the body.
Over time, all that thick, sugar-heavy blood acts almost like a slow-moving syrup, and it physically damages your microvasculature. Those are the tiny terminal ends of your blood vessels. When this microscopic damage chokes off the circulation in your extremities, like your feet, it leads to neuropathy, which is severe nerve damage. Patients literally lose the ability to feel a cut or an injury. Combine that lack of feeling with extremely poor wound healing from the bad blood flow and a huge risk of infection, well, it frequently leads to severe ulcers and, tragically, amputations.
But listen, it's not just the tiny vessels getting destroyed, it's the major highways too. The macrovascular complications include rampant plaque buildup, high blood pressure, and stroke. Honestly, the absolute crucial point I want you to take away from this whole section is this equation right here. Diabetes equals heart disease. Coronary artery disease is the #1 complication, and it remains the major cause of death for both type 1 and type 2 diabetes.
Part 4. The mouth-body connection.
This is fascinating. Severe periodontal or gum disease shares a really dangerous two-way street with diabetes. Uncontrolled diabetes makes gum disease way more aggressive, actively destroying the gums and the bone. But the relationship actually works the other way too. The severe chronic inflammation radiating from your infected gums makes it incredibly hard for the body to control blood sugar levels, viciously complicating the diabetes.
And beyond just the gums, the broader dental impact is huge. Remember that polyuria symptom we talked about? All those frequent bathroom trips? That fluid loss causes severe dry mouth, clinically called xerostomia. When you take a mouth that lacks the protective washing effects of saliva and combine it with a body full of excess blood sugar, you get the absolute perfect storm for rampant cavities and stubborn fungal infections like candida. Yeast just thrives on that extra sugar.
Finally, Part 5. Taking back control. You know the old saying, you can't manage what you don't measure? Well, daily finger pricks are great for showing your blood sugar in one exact isolated moment. Doctors rely heavily on the A1C test for the big picture. This test measures the percentage of hemoglobin inside your red blood cells that is physically stuck to glucose. Since red blood cells live for about 3 months, this gives us a highly accurate historical average of your blood sugar over that time. If you're managing diabetes, staying under 7% is the target, but getting to 6% or less, that's the ideal. So how do we treat type 2? Think of it like a stepping stone approach. Step 1, diet, weight loss, and exercise. Exercise is magic because it physically forces your muscles to use up glucose and beautifully improves the sensitivity of those cellular locks. But if lifestyle changes aren't quite enough, we step up to oral medications. And if the disease progresses to where the pancreas just gets exhausted from overworking, we step up to insulin therapy to manually supply those missing keys.
When we do have to use those oral medications on step 2, we're usually picking between 2 brilliant mechanical strategies. Big guanides, like the super common drug metformin, work by telling your liver to stop producing so much emergency glucose, basically turning down the body's sugar faucet. On the flip side, sulfonylureas go straight to the pancreas and actively stimulate those beta cells, forcing them to pump out more keys.
Well, we've covered a ton today: the biological mechanics, the cellular breakdowns, the serious toll it takes on the whole body, and how we treat it. But I want to leave you with this final thought. With the prevalence of this metabolic disease skyrocketing, how can understanding this incredibly delicate cellular balancing act empower you? How could it change your daily choices, your diet, your movement, long before the locks jam and the system breaks? It's your body, and it's an amazing machine. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.
You know, we're talking about one of the greatest medical breakthroughs in all of human history, a genuine miracle that has saved literally hundreds of millions of lives. But here's the thing, that miracle is in serious jeopardy. So today, let's dive into the story of antimicrobials, both the miracle and the growing menace.
Just think about that for a second. It's a pretty terrifying thought, isn't it? For most of us, it sounds like something from a completely different time. But for basically all of human history, right up until just a few generations ago, this was the stone-cold reality. Take a look at this. It might look like a minor infection, but before the 1940s, bacteria were this invisible, formidable foe that we just couldn't beat. Something this simple could easily lead to an amputation or worse. The world was just a fundamentally more dangerous place.
Yeah, to really, truly appreciate the gift that antibiotics are, we first have to step back in time, into that world, a world where we had almost no real defense against these microscopic invaders.
But then, a moment of just pure scientific luck changed everything. A forgotten, messy experiment led to a discovery that would completely reshape human civilization as we know it.
The year is 1929.
A scientist named Alexander Fleming gets back from a holiday and finds he'd left a stack of petri dishes sitting out in his lab. One of them was contaminated with a common mold. Now, most people would have just chucked it. But Fleming, he decided to take a closer look.
And this is basically what he saw. All around that blob of mold, there was this clear ring, a total dead zone, where the bacteria just could not grow. That mold was producing something that was lethal to bacteria. He had just accidentally stumbled upon penicillin.
So Fleming made his discovery in 1929, but it actually took more than 10 years of hard work, really pushed along by the urgent needs of World War II, to figure out how to mass produce this stuff. But once they did, its arrival really did usher in a brand new age for humanity. So how does this miracle drug actually work? I mean, how can one substance kill off invading bacteria without hurting us, the host? Well, scientists call it a magic bullet. And the secret is all about targeting the differences between their cells and ours. The core idea here is something called selective toxicity. The easiest way to think about it is this. Bacteria have certain parts and machinery that our human cells just don't. Antibiotics are specifically designed to attack only those unique bacterial features, which leaves our own cells totally safe and sound. It's an unbelievably elegant solution.
And they fight in two main ways. First, you have your bactericidal antibiotics. These are the killers. They go right in and just destroy the bacteria. Then you have the bacteriostatic ones. I like to call these the pausers. They don't kill the bacteria outright, but they stop them from multiplying, basically holding them in place so our own immune system can come in and finish the job.
And their methods of attack are pretty ingenious. Some, like penicillin, are what we call cell wall inhibitors. They're like a wrecking ball for a structure that our cells don't even have, so we're totally fine. Others go a little deeper, messing with the bacteria's DNA to stop it from replicating, or blocking its ability to create the proteins it needs to live. There are a whole bunch of ways to stop them in their tracks.
But this is where our story takes a really dark turn. You see, for every action, there's a reaction. We hit the bacteria with our magic bullets, and for decades we were winning, hands down. But bacteria have been on this planet for billions of years. They are absolute masters of survival, and they began to fight back.
So let's simplify how this all works. Think of an antibiotic as a key. It's designed to fit perfectly into a specific lock, a protein inside the bacteria, and jam it up, stopping that protein from doing its job. For a long time, we had the master keys to pretty much all the locks.
But bacteria evolve at a mind-boggling speed. Through tiny, random mutations, a bacterium can change the shape of its lock, and suddenly our key doesn't fit anymore. But what's even more alarming is something called DNA exchange. One resistant bacterium can literally copy its new defense plan and hand it off directly to its neighbors, teaching them the trick.
So what's the result of all this? This number, 35,000. That's how many people die every single year in the United States alone from infections that our antibiotics just can't beat anymore. This is not a threat for the future. It is happening right now.
And look, this isn't just some abstract problem for hospitals or scientists. The rise of antibiotic resistance is a crisis that involves every single one of us. And our daily habits are, unfortunately, a huge part of the problem. So how are we helping this crisis along? Well, it happens in these small ways that we don't even think about. Like when you stop taking your prescription the moment you feel better. All that does is kill off the weakest bacteria and leave the toughest ones alive to multiply. Or what about using antibiotics for a virus, like the flu? They have absolutely zero effect. It's like giving the bacteria free training sessions on how to beat our defenses, taking a dose that's too small as another one. And all of this gets even worse because of their widespread use in agriculture, which creates a huge breeding ground for resistance. These are the habits that are disarming our best weapons.
So we're left with this absolutely critical question. We were handed a miracle that makes modern medicine, everything from surgery to chemotherapy, even possible. But that miracle is slipping right through our fingers. So what does the world actually look like if our magic bullets stop working? That's a future we all have to work together to prevent.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're here today because we're going to be diving into an intense microscopic battlefield that is, quite literally, existing right inside your own body. Think about it. Whenever you pick up a prescription from the pharmacy, do you actually know what those tiny little pills are doing? Well, today we're going to demystify that entire process. We're breaking down the incredible antimicrobial arsenal at our disposal and looking at the absolute genius pharmacology that keeps us all alive. Picture this for a second. You get a nasty infection. It's red, it's inflamed, it's super painful. What's our very first instinct? We reach for a pill, right? But you really have to ask yourself, is your medication just fighting the infection, or is it actually fighting you too? Do we truly understand the incredibly complex microscopic war happening right under our skin the moment we swallow that dose? Well, by the end of this explainer, you absolutely will. Okay, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the war on bacteria, unpack how antibiotics actually work, outline the rules of engagement, tackle the antibiotic resistance crisis, explore side effects and interactions, and finally bring it all home to antibiotics in dental care. Let's get into it. Part 1. The War on Bacteria, Setting the Baseline. Now, it's absolutely crucial we get our terminology straight right out of the gate, just so we know exactly what weapons we're dealing with here. People toss these words around interchangeably all the time, but structurally, they're totally different. An antibiotic is literal biological warfare at the cellular level. It's actually produced by a microorganism to destroy or suppress the growth of other microorganisms. It's bugs fighting bugs for survival. An anti-infective, on the other hand, well, that's just a broader umbrella term. It refers to a substance from literally any source that kills or inhibits microbes like bacteria, yeast, or viruses. And this whole epic saga, it really kicked off back in 1929. Alexander Fleming made this incredible happy accident of an observation. He noticed that a mold growing in his, what he thought was ruined, Petri dish was actively stopping the surrounding bacteria from growing. It was just a natural defense mechanism. But realizing that we could actually harness this natural biological weapon, yeah, that changed human history forever. And that brilliant accident evolved pretty rapidly. By 1939, we saw the very first systemic antimicrobial therapy actually hit clinical application. It was a drug called Prontosil. This was the first commercially available antibacterial drug, and it belonged to a class we know as sulfonamides, or just sulfadrugs. Moving on to part 2, how antibiotics actually work, the hero's superpowers. So how are these drugs actually pulling this off? Well, they don't just go in and carpet bomb the whole area. They're more like tactical hunters. They have 3 main targeting methods. First, they look for unique targets. These are characteristics of the bacterium that human cells simply don't even have, like bacterial cell walls. Then you've got similar targets, where the drug goes after metabolic pathways that are kind of like ours, but they use different enzymes. And finally, shared targets. This is where both the host, you, and the bacterium synthesize proteins, but maybe they use differently sized ribosomes. Now, why does knowing those targets actually matter? Well, it sets up this idea of friendly fire. A drug's ability to take out the bad bacteria while leaving your healthy human cells alone is called selectivity. Drugs that hunt those unique targets are highly selective, so they have super low toxicity to us. But if a drug targets a shared pathway, toxicity goes way up. In pharmacology, we measure this with the therapeutic index. A lower therapeutic index means the drug just isn't as selective, and that means a lot more collateral damage to your own cells. All right, section 3, the rules of engagement, bactericidal versus bacteriostatic. We basically classify these drugs into 2 camps. Bactericidal antibiotics, those are your frontline assassins. They kill the bacteria directly, usually by destroying the bacterial cell walls. And since human cells don't have cell walls, this is incredibly effective and highly selective. On the flip side, we have bacteriostatic antibiotics. These guys use more of a pausing strategy. They inhibit multiplication and slow bacterial growth down to a crawl. But because they aren't striking the fatal blow themselves, bacteriostatic agents rely heavily on your own immune system to step up and finish the job. Which brings us to an absolute ironclad rule of pharmacology. Do not prescribe a bacteriostatic and a bactericidal drug together. Seriously, mixing these two creates a massive antagonistic effect. They basically cancel each other out. Think about it. A bactericidal drug, like penicillin, works best when bacterial cell division is happening rapidly. So if you throw in a bacteriostatic drug that slows down that cell division, you are literally disarming your own frontline assassin. It's a huge friendly fire blunder. Section 4. The antibiotic resistance crisis. The villain adapts. Okay, here's the massive plot twist in our story. The villains are adapting. Get this number. 2.8 million. That is the number of antibiotic resistance infections that happen every single year, resulting in over 35,000 deaths, and the problem is only getting worse worldwide. The microscopic villains are starting to win the arms race. So how on earth is this happening? Let's break it down. First, indiscriminate clinical use. Think prescribing antibiotics for a viral cold. Totally useless, but it happens. Second, and we've all been guilty of this, patient failure to complete prescriptions. You feel better, you stop taking the pills. But the sensitive bacteria die first, leaving the strong, stubborn ones alive to rapidly recolonize. Third, genetic exchange. Bacteria can literally swap genetic material with each other to create less permeable cell walls or enzymes that completely deactivate our drugs. And finally, the meat industry. Agricultural practices are a huge driver of resistance, which is exactly why the USDA routinely tests meat for antibiotic residues to stop sales if the levels are too high. Section 5. Side effects and interactions. The collateral damage. It's really wild to see how interconnected our bodily systems are with our internal microbiome. Take oral contraceptives, for example. Estrogens actually become active when they're metabolized by our internal bacteria. So if an antibiotic wipes out those bacteria, you decrease the active estrogen. Or look at anticoagulants like warfarin. Vitamin K helps your blood clot, and guess who makes that vitamin K? The bacteria in your intestines. Wipe out the bacteria, your vitamin K plummets, and your blood thinners effect dangerously amplifies, which can lead to prolonged bleeding. It's a crazy domino effect. Plus, wiping out your normal healthy gut flora creates this biological vacuum, and that allows opportunistic superinfections to move right in and take over. We're talking about the overgrowth of really dangerous bacteria like C. diff, which causes severe inflammation, or fungal superinfections like candidiasis, more commonly known as a yeast infection. This is exactly why introducing probiotics like Lactobacillus acetophilus is so often recommended. You got to restore that delicate bacterial balance. Finally, Section 6. Antibiotics in dental care, the local battlefield. Let's take all this high-level pharmacology and bring it down to a battlefield we can all relate to, your mouth. If you've ever had a really severe toothache, you've probably met penicillin. It is the gold standard for dental infections. Its secret weapon is this specific structure called a beta-lactam ring. That ring is amazing because it targets and inhibits the exact enzymes essential for bacterial cell wall synthesis. Because it targets a unique difference, it has very low toxicity for you, but it is absolutely devastating to the specific gram-positive cocci causing that painful toothache. But because of that resistance crisis we just talked about, your dentist can't just hand these out like candy. There are strict protocols. Number 1, select the specific agent for the suspected bacteria. Number 2, and this is key, choose the narrowest spectrum possible. You don't want a broad-spectrum drug wiping out your entire microbiome if a narrow targeted drug can handle the local issue. And number 3, whenever possible, culture the infection so you know exactly what enemy you're up against. So, when do they actually deploy these drugs? Mainly for active tooth infections. But listen, here is a huge caveat. Antibiotics alone will never cure a dental infection if you don't address the root cause, like getting an extraction or a root canal. They're also used as pre-medication for immunocompromised patients, or to prevent endocarditis, which is an infection of the heart valves during dental work. They even use low-dose bacteriostatic agents like doxycycline to calm the host response in periodontal disease without totally nuking the bacteria. We've covered a lot today. The history, the cellular mechanics, the absolute golden rule of not mixing your drug types, and the very real dangers of superinfections and systemic resistance. Look, every single time you are handed a prescription, you are holding a weapon of microscopic warfare. So I want to leave you with this final thought. The next time you're tempted to just stop taking your medication a few days early because you feel fine, ask yourself, are you contributing to the resistance, or are you helping us win the evolutionary arms race? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking the big question.
Ever been prescribed a steroid? You're not alone. They're one of the most common and powerful tools in all of medicine. But here's the thing. What starts out as a miracle cure for inflammation can actually become a really serious risk. And it can happen in the one place you would probably never expect, the dentist chair. Okay, let's get into it.
All right, so let's kick things off with a connection that, honestly, might sound a little weird at first. Steroids and your dentist. What's the deal there?
And look, it's a totally fair question, right? When you think steroids, you're probably picturing an athlete with an injury or maybe someone having a bad allergic reaction. But dentistry? It just doesn't seem to fit. Well, the answer is actually a lot more significant than you'd probably guess.
So, check this out. Sometimes your body's own immune system kind of goes haywire. It gets confused and starts attacking the healthy tissues inside your mouth. This can cause some incredibly painful conditions, things like lichen planus or those really nasty canker sores. And that's where corticosteroids come in. They're prescribed to basically tell the immune system, hey, calm down, stand down, and give the person some much-needed relief.
And get this,
This is not some rare, once-in-a-blue-moon thing. Not at all. I mean, sure, antibiotics and painkillers are the top dogs, numbers 1 and 2. But corticosteroids? They're estimated to be the 4th most frequently prescribed type of drug in all of dentistry. That's huge! Which is exactly why we need to understand what's going on with them. So to really get a handle on the drug, we've got to go back to the source. And here's the key. This isn't some weird artificial chemical cooked up in a lab. Nope. Its design is basically a copy and paste of a hormone your own body's making right now. All right, say hello to your adrenal glands. You've got these 2 little guys, and they sit right on top of your kidneys like a couple of hats. But don't let their size fool you. They are absolute powerhouses. Their number 1 job? Helping your body manage stress. Any kind of stress, whether it's physical or emotional. Now, if we were to kind of zoom in and take a closer look, you'd see the adrenal gland has different layers. There's an inner part, but we're going to focus on the outer layer, the cortex. The best way to think about the adrenal cortex is like a super sophisticated hormone factory. And its main product, the body's very own all-natural steroids. And the star product coming off that factory line is something called cortisol. You've almost definitely heard of it, right? It's famous as the stress hormone. And it's called that for a very good reason. It is absolutely crucial for managing your energy levels. And, just as importantly, it's what keeps your immune system's inflammatory reactions from going completely off the rails.
So, picture a normal, chill, low-stress day. On a day like that, your body is just casually churning out about 20 milligrams of cortisol. That's your baseline, just enough to keep the lights on and everything humming along nicely.
But when things get intense, I'm talking major surgery, a serious injury, or even just an extremely stressful event, something pretty incredible happens. Those adrenal glands kick into high gear and ramp up production like crazy. We're talking a 10-fold increase, up to 200 milligrams or even more. This massive surge, it's literally a survival mechanism.
So you see, we have this amazing built-in system for controlling inflammation. And of course, medical science looked at that and had a brilliant idea. Hey, what if we could bottle that power and use it whenever we needed it? And that is exactly what these glucocorticoid drugs are. They're basically synthetic versions of our own cortisol. They're designed to do the same job, to mimic its effects, but, and this is a big but, often at way, way higher doses. Their whole reason for existing is to be a super powerful anti-inflammatory.
So how do they actually do it? Well, it's kind of like a domino effect, a chemical cascade. The drugs go in and they block this one key enzyme. By shutting that one thing down, they stop the body from making 2 other chemicals that are major players in causing inflammation, prostaglandins and leukotrienes. And the result? Pow! Inflammation is just stopped dead in its tracks.
And because inflammation is the bad guy at the root of so many different health problems, the list of uses for these drugs is just huge. I mean, we're talking everything from managing autoimmune diseases like lupus to making sure the body doesn't reject a new organ after a transplant, all the way to treating bad allergic reactions and, yep, sports injuries too. But you knew there was a but coming, right? This kind of incredible power, well, it doesn't come for free. When we use this super drug for a long time, we start to see the other edge of that double-edged sword. You know, the crazy thing is, the problem isn't that the drug is some foreign chemical. Like we said, it's almost identical to our own cortisol. The real issue is the dose, and even more than that, how long you're on it. When you expose your body to these super high levels of hormones for weeks or months or even years, that's when you get some really significant consequences. So let's just run through a few of the biggest side effects. First up, blood sugar. Remember how cortisol's job is to manage energy by making glucose available? Well, when you flood the system with high doses of these drugs, it can lead to hyperglycemia. That's just a fancy way of saying chronically high blood sugar. Okay, next. Since the whole point of the drug is to suppress the immune system, it also ends up suppressing all the important processes your body uses to repair itself. So what does that mean in the real world? It means wounds, including a surgical site in your mouth after a dental procedure, heal much, much more slowly.
And here's a really visible one. Taking these for a long time can actually cause your body to move its fat around, to redistribute it. This can lead to a really distinct round look in the face, which people often call moon face.
And that same exact process, that fat redistribution, can also cause fat to build up on the back of the neck, creating something that's known as a buffalo hump. And these aren't just cosmetic changes, you know? They're really clear outward signs of the deep, profound changes these drugs are making on the inside.
Look,
All these side effects are serious, but there's one risk in particular that is immediate, it's life-threatening, and it brings us full circle. Right back to that stressful dental visit we were talking about at the very beginning.
Okay, here it is. This is the absolute core of the problem. If your body is getting a constant, high-dose supply of steroids from a pill, your own adrenal glands just stop listening. They don't get the signal to make their own cortisol anymore, so they basically just go to sleep. The factory shuts down. And then, when a truly stressful event hits, they can't just wake up and spring into action. They're offline.
And that leads us to the most dangerous risk of all. If a patient who's been on long-term steroids suddenly faces a huge stressor, like an invasive dental procedure, their adrenal glands are asleep at the wheel. They can't produce that massive, life-saving surge of cortisol. And without it, the body just can't cope. It can go into a state of shock called an adrenal crisis. And let me be clear, this is a full-blown medical emergency.
And this is why it is so critical to tell your doctors and dentists about everything you're taking. These drugs are an incredibly powerful ally, no doubt, but they fundamentally change the rulebook on how your body handles stress. An informed doctor, an informed dentist, they can take steps to protect you. They might adjust your dose before a procedure, for instance, to make sure you avoid a crisis. So the real question is it time for you to have that conversation?
So, if you or someone you know has asthma, you've definitely seen one of these inhalers. But have you ever really stopped to think about what's actually going on in there when that medicine goes in? It turns out it's not just one thing. Today, we're going to break down the surprisingly clever way these drugs fight a two-front war in your lungs. Yeah, breathing through a straw. That's a quote from someone describing an asthma attack. And wow, does it hit home? It captures that sudden, terrifying feeling when the most essential thing in the world, air, is suddenly almost impossible to get. And look, that terrifying feeling, it's not some rare thing. We're talking about a shared experience for over 300 million people across the globe. That number is just massive. And it's exactly why understanding what's going on and how to fight it is so incredibly important. So to really get how the solution works, we first have to wrap our heads around the problem. And an asthma attack isn't just one thing going wrong. You have to think of it like a battle being fought on two completely separate fronts at the same time inside your lung. Okay, so let's break down this two-front war. First up, you've got the squeeze. This is the part that hits you like a ton of bricks. Boom, the muscles around your airways just clamp down. But then there's the swell, and this one's a little sneakier. This is the inflammation, the swelling inside your airways that builds up over time and sets the stage for the attack. All right, let's put the medical name on our first problem. The squeeze is officially called bronchoconstriction. You can really think of it as a plumbing problem. The pipes, your airways, are being squeezed shut from the outside. This is what causes that sudden, heart-pounding shortness of breath. And our second front, the swell, well, that's inflammation. Now, this isn't a muscle thing at all. This is your immune system going into overdrive. It's causing the inside of your airways to swell up and get all clogged with mucus, which makes the whole situation way worse. Okay, so we've got two different problems, right? A squeeze and a swell. It only makes sense that you need two totally different types of solutions. So first, let's meet the emergency responders, the team you call when the fire is already raging. This is the question when an attack hits, right? When everything's closing in and you can't get a breath, what do you do? How in the world do you force those muscles to just let go? Well, the answer comes from a class of drugs called beta-2 agonists. I know, that's a mouthful. Just think of them as the rescue squad. Their whole deal is that they're bronchodilators, which literally means their one and only job is to open up or dilate the airways. And they're short-acting, which is key. It means they work fast. The hero of this squad, you've probably heard of it, albuterol. So how do they work so fast? This is where it gets really cool. These little albuterol molecules are like the perfect key designed for a very specific lock on your airway muscles. They just zoom in there, click into place, and turn. And the message is crystal clear. Unlock, relax now. And just like that, the airway opens up and you can breathe again. It's incredible. But, you know, firefighters are for emergencies. You can't just live your life waiting for the next 5-alarm fire. You need a long-term plan. You've got to fireproof the building. Right, so putting out fires is one thing, but what about preventing them from ever starting in the first place? This is the question that takes asthma treatment from just crisis control to actual long-term management. How do you deal with that underlying swelling? And for that job, you need a totally different crew, the prevention force. These are anti-inflammatory drugs, and the main type is inhaled corticosteroids. These guys aren't about speed. They're in it for the long haul. They work every single day to bring down that chronic swelling and reduce mucus. A really common one you might hear about is fluticasone. So, if the rescue inhaler is a key that unlocks a muscle, what's the deal with this one? Think of it like a commander issuing a ceasefire order. It's telling those overactive immune cells in your lungs to just stand down, calm the inflammation, stop the fight. And this chart just lays it all out perfectly. It's a fantastic summary. On one side, you've got your firefighters, your rescue meds. What do? They open your airways, and they do it fast. When do you use them? During an attack. The big name here is albuterol. Then on the other side, you've got fireproofing, your controller meds. What's their job? To bring down that swelling over time. So you use them every single day for prevention. And a classic example is fluticasone. See? 2 different jobs, 2 different tools. Okay, so we have our 2 forces lined up. The firefighters for rescue and the fireproofers for prevention. The last piece of the puzzle is figuring out the strategy. How do you actually deploy them? Well, it all comes down to a personal battle plan that matches the treatment to your specific situation. Basically, treatment works on what's called a step-up approach. For someone with really mild asthma that doesn't flare up much, just having a firefighter like albuterol on hand might be enough. But as symptoms get more persistent, the strategy evolves. You add in daily fireproofing with a corticosteroid to build up your defenses. And for the most severe cases, the plan gets even more robust with a combination of daily drugs. But you always have that firefighter ready to go for emergencies. And this really brings us to the whole point of modern asthma management. It's not just about getting through attacks anymore, it's about making them a non-issue. The entire strategy boils down to this one simple, powerful idea. Use your fireproofing so well that you almost never have to call the firefighters. So, I'll leave you with this. Once you really understand that critical difference, that managing your breathing isn't just about reacting to a crisis, but about protecting your airways every single day, how does that change the way you think about it? It shifts everything, doesn't it? It's the difference between waiting for a fire and living confidently in a house that you've already made fireproof.
You know, they are without a doubt one of the greatest medical breakthroughs in all of history, a true miracle of science that literally doubled human life expectancy in the 20th century. But that miracle is now in very real danger. In this explainer, we are going to unpack the incredible story of antibiotics, from a completely accidental discovery to the looming threat that could send us right back to a time when a simple paper cut could be a death sentence.
It sounds totally crazy, right? Like something out of a horror movie? But what if I told you that for most of human history, that wasn't an exaggeration at all? A tiny little scrape, a minor infection, yeah, that could absolutely be the end. An injury that we wouldn't even think twice about today could quickly spiral into a life-threatening infection, one that might lead to an amputation or even worse. This was just the grim reality of the world before the discovery we're about to explore.
So how in the world did we get from that terrifying reality to the one we live in today? Well, it all started with, believe it or not, a happy accident and one very, very sharp eye. Okay, so meet the man who basically stumbled upon a revolution. This is Alexander Fleming, and he wasn't looking for some kind of wonder drug. He was a bacteriologist who came back from holiday, looked at his experiments, and found something, well, something very peculiar. He saw this fuzzy little blob of mold, penicillium mold to be exact, growing in one of his petri dishes. But here's the crazy part. All around that mold, there was a clear zone, a little circle where the bacteria he was studying just couldn't grow. It was like a force field. Fleming realized, whoa, this mold is making something that kills bacteria. And just like that, he had discovered penicillin.
And that one little observation, it set off a complete revolution. From Fleming's discovery in 1929, it took about a decade for the first commercial antibiotic to actually hit the market. And by the 1940s, penicillin was being mass-produced and became an absolute game-changer, saving countless soldiers' lives during World War II. The age of antibiotics had officially begun.
So we know they work, but how? How do these amazing drugs wage war on these tiny bacterial invaders without, hurting us in the process? The science behind it is just incredibly clever.
Okay, so it really boils down to 2 main strategies. First, you've got your killers. These are called bactericidal antibiotics. They go in and just directly destroy the bacteria, boom, gone. Then you have the inhibitors, the bacteriostatic ones. They're a bit more subtle.
They don't kill directly, they just stop the bacteria from multiplying, which gives your own immune system the leg up it needs to come in and clear them out.
And these two teams, the killers and the inhibitors, they use three main ways to attack. First, they can just obliterate the bacterium's protective outer shell, its cell wall. Or they can sabotage its DNA so it can't make copies of itself. And third, they can shut down its little protein factories called ribosomes, so it can't build the things it needs to survive.
Now that first strategy, targeting the cell wall, is just genius. Here's why. Bacterial cells have this tough, rigid outer wall to protect them, but our cells, we don't have one. So an antibiotic that attacks that wall is like a magic bullet. It is absolutely lethal to bacteria, but it's totally harmless to us. It's that perfect selectivity that makes them so amazing.
For decades, these miracle drugs just worked. I mean, they were our ultimate weapon against infection. But we've been overusing them. A lot. And while we've been doing that, the bacteria, well, they've been learning. They've been evolving.
Which is a totally fair question, right? If these drugs are so smart, then what's the big deal? Well, the problem isn't the drug anymore. The problem is the bug. And the scale of this problem it's just staggering. Every single year in the United States alone, 2.8 million people get infections that are resistant to antibiotics. And for over 35,000 of those people, those infections are fatal. Just let that sink in for a second. We're talking about people dying from illnesses that just a generation ago were considered easy to treat. This is the enemy that we're up against now, bacterial resistance. And put simply, it's just what happens when bacteria evolve defenses. They figure out how to survive our drugs, making our antibiotics totally useless against them. They become superbugs.
Now, this isn't just some random act of nature. I mean, resistance is a natural process, sure, but we have been hitting the fast-forward button on it dramatically through our own actions.
We are, without realizing it, literally training bacteria to be stronger. Every time we take antibiotics for a virus, like a cold or the flu, it does nothing to the virus, but it exposes all the harmless bacteria in our bodies to the drug, giving them a chance to learn and adapt. The same thing happens when we don't finish a full prescription. We're not giving the drug enough time to wipe out all the invaders. Yeah, think of it like survival of the fittest, but in hyperspeed. When you start taking an antibiotic, it kills off all the weakest bacteria first. Now, if you stop taking it the second you feel better, you haven't killed the really tough ones yet. All you've done is clear out the competition, leaving a wide open field for the strongest, most resistant bacteria to take over and multiply like crazy.
Okay, I know this all sounds pretty dire, but the fight is not over. Not by a long shot. We have the power to protect these life-saving drugs for generations to come, but it's going to require a change in how we think and how we act, both as individuals and as a whole society.
So what can we do? Well, the good news is the steps are actually really straightforward. Number 1, always finish your full prescription, even if you feel better halfway through. 2, don't pressure your doctor for antibiotics when you have a cold or the flu. And 3, never ever use antibiotics that were prescribed for someone else. These simple actions, when we all do them, can have a massive impact.
And look, this isn't just about what we do as individuals. Big systemic changes are absolutely crucial, and they're happening. For a long time, the overuse of antibiotics in agriculture was a huge part of the problem. But as of June 2023, there's a new rule in the US that requires farmers to get a vet's prescription for antibiotics for their livestock. That is a huge step in the right direction.
And this is really the question that we're all left with, isn't it? From routine surgeries to chemotherapy to organ transplants, so much of modern medicine completely depends on our ability to control bacterial infections. We inherited a miracle. Now it's up to all of us to make sure we don't squander it.
Okay, let's dive into the microscopic world that lives inside your mouth. We're going to talk about the fungi and viruses that are behind some of the most common and kind of annoying oral health issues. You know, things like weird white patches or those painful cold sores. Let's get right into it. Yeah, if any of that sounds a little too familiar, trust me, you are not alone. These are super common problems, and today we're going to break down what they are, what causes them, and most importantly, what you can do about them. All right, first up on our tour is fungus. Now, I know what you're thinking. That sounds pretty gnarly, but just stick with me. It's time to meet the main character of our fungal story. So this little guy is Candida albicans. And get this fungus is actually a totally normal resident in most of our mouths. It just hangs out, living peacefully with all the other bacteria and microorganisms, and usually it doesn't cause a single problem. And that's the key thing to understand here. The problem isn't that Candida exists, it's that it can start to overgrow. See, when that delicate balance inside our mouths gets thrown off, this usually harmless fungus can multiply like crazy, and suddenly you've got an infection on your hands. So, what does it actually look like when this fungus decides to throw a party in your mouth? Well, it can show up in a couple different ways. Probably the most famous one is oral thrush. It often looks like these white, kind of creamy patches. And while you hear about it a lot with babies, because their immune systems are still getting up to speed, it can absolutely happen to adults too, especially if their own immune system is a bit down. And then there's this other really common one called angular cheilitis. This is that sore, red, cracking you sometimes get right at the corners of your mouth. Now, other things can cause it, but a lot of the time, the culprit is an overgrowth of, you guessed it, our friend Candida. Which, of course, brings us to the big question. What is it that messes up that delicate balance and basically gives Candida the green light to just go wild? Well, it turns out there are actually a bunch of different triggers. Some are big health things, like having a weakened immune system or uncontrolled diabetes. Others can be medications, like when you take antibiotics, they can wipe out the good bacteria that normally keep Candida in check. And then there are even lifestyle things, like smoking, or a physical problem like dentures that don't fit quite right. The list is surprisingly long. But, and this is the really good news, unlike some other things we're going to talk about, these fungal infections are very, very treatable. So let's take a look at how doctors fight back. Okay, this is actually pretty wild. When you look at the common treatments, for mild cases, you've got topical stuff like nystatin. But look at that key fact. The most common liquid version is 50% sucrose. Yes, 50%. Sugar, which is just crazy when you think about it because you're fighting an infection that loves to feed on sugar. For the more serious infections, doctors will go to systemic pills, like ketoconazole, which needs your stomach acid to work, or the really powerful and often more expensive fluconazole. And the results really speak for themselves. I mean, look at this. On the left, you've got a really severe case of thrush. And on the right, that's the same person just a few days after they started treatment. It just shows you how incredibly effective these medicines can be. But, and this is an important but, those stronger systemic drugs can be pretty tough on the body, especially the liver. That's why if a patient is on them for a long time, their doctor is absolutely going to want to monitor their liver function. It's a really crucial safety check. All right, we are totally shifting gears now. We've been talking about fungus, which we can usually treat and get rid of. Now let's talk about viruses. These are the unwanted guests that often decide they're going to stick around for life. So let's meet herpes simplex virus 1, or HSV1. This is the virus that's behind most of those cold sores or fever blisters we all know and, well, don't love. And here is the single biggest difference from fungus. There's no cure for this. Once you have the virus, it stays dormant in your body and can cause outbreaks again and again. And while we usually think of a cold sore popping up on the outside of the lip, outbreaks can definitely happen inside the mouth too. When they do, they tend to show up on the tougher tissues, like the roof of your mouth or on your gums. So what wakes this sleeping virus up? A lot of the time, it's surprisingly simple stuff. For so many people, emotional stress is a massive trigger. But physical trauma can do it too. I mean, anything from a trip to the dentist to just getting a little too much sun can be enough to spark an outbreak. So since we can't actually get rid of the virus, the whole goal of treatment changes. It becomes all about management. How can we make the outbreaks happen less often, make them less severe, and get them to go away faster? And that is precisely what antiviral drugs are for. They don't kill the virus, but they basically stop it from making copies of itself. So what that means is they can really shorten how long an outbreak lasts, and if you take them regularly, they can even cut down on how often you get them in the first place. For a lot of folks, the first line of defense is a simple cream you can get over the counter. You've probably seen something like Abreva. If you can get that on at the very first sign, that little tingle, it can make a real difference in how long the cold sore sticks around and how bad it gets. So really, managing this comes down to a simple 3-step game plan. First, figure out what your personal triggers are. Is it stress? Is it the sun? Second, have a topical cream ready to go the second you feel an outbreak coming on. And third, if you get outbreaks that are really frequent or severe, you should definitely talk to a doctor about prescription pills because those can be a total game changer. You know, when you look at these infections, it really drives home this one big idea. Our mouth is an incredibly complex ecosystem where balance is everything. It really makes you stop and think, right? What can the health of this tiny little community tell us about the health of our entire body? It's just a powerful reminder that when it comes to our health, it's all connected. Thanks for joining me on this one.